we would like to remind you a few housekeeping items. Please note that this session is being recorded for our colleagues who could not join us for real time. We're using automated Zoom captions during the live event, and we will edit the recording transcripts before we share them with you to be more accurate. At the bottom of the Zoom window, there's a closed caption button, and you will see the live transcript text underneath that button. Select to turn them on or off as you prefer. Please pose your questions using the chat function that we'll moderate and discuss with our panelists. Toward the end of the hour, we'll share how we can continue the conversation online and share some additional resources to support your teaching. So now I would like to hand the microphone to Shelly Leming for her presentation about renegotiating grammar in second language writing classrooms. Thank you, Shelly. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Didem. Thank you for allowing me to bring this topic into this discussion, into this this conference, because I think the language component is an interesting part of equity, an important part of equity, right? So, so my session is entitled Renegotiating Grammar in the L2 Writing Classroom. And by L2, probably most of you know that I'm referring to second language, which really is talking about multilingual, English as a second or other language, ESO, right? But I chose that term because it's second language writing is often, it comes from more the field of TESOL, which is, sorry, my background. So I'm going to share a little bit of my path for thinking about this and my experience, just to give a context for it. But you can see, so I come from more the TESOL perspective. I got my master's in English and TESOL at San Francisco State. And so I started teaching mostly English that included writing, right? It was one of the skills. But then I've also more recently been teaching writing, including English, right? And so I just, I've been thinking a lot about the language component of the writing class, the language development portion of the writing classes. Oops. And I just to give you, I'm mostly teaching in higher ed. I mostly right now teach at California College of the Arts, which is a private art school, but then I've also been teaching at San Francisco State, UC Berkeley in the summer programs, College of Marin. So I have, in this higher ed context, I've encountered different student populations, and how when we talk about multilinguals, there's a lot of variety in that group, right? So just to give you a sense of the breadth. So I've been thinking about, as a teaching professor, I think of it as my asset. I'm just going to go back for a second. That one of my assets is that I understand how to teach English, the grammar of it, pedagogical grammar. And so I've always seen, and I continue to see that as one of my strengths as a writing teacher for multilingual students. But I've been thinking a lot about ideas related to linguistic bias, and how that connects to what I do as a professional. So I'm just going to give you a minute to read this quote. Okay, so this is an idea from John McWhorter, who is a professor of linguistics, but also, you know, he's popularized ideas, linguistic ideas in books and a column in the New York Times. But I think he gets at this idea about the ism of language, right? Because people are often very aware of the racism or sexism or classism, but the linguicism is actually something that sometimes gets lost in the general population, and also even in our students, I mean, I think really of the students and how they can be judged or defined by the way they use language, and in particular English. And so it's probably familiar to you to hear even people that, you know, my friends or family will say things like, oh, their English is really bad, or their English is broken. And so I feel like they will make these sort of negative judgments about the language, and it's more than they would about other things, right? That it seems to be more there. People are really judge harshly language usage, and so that's I was thinking about this as what is one of the biggest obstacle, or the overtness of it, and the obstacles to overcoming it in society. And one of the central ideas I want to talk about is this idea of a standard language ideology. So ideologies are socially constructed, and they're myths that are treated like a fact, right? So when people, not us per se for language, if we have language training or we're multilingual ourselves, then we might not think this way, but it is a prevalent belief in society that there is something called a standard language or standard variety of English, that there's one, and it's the ideal one. It's better, it's proper, it's superior to other dialects. It's easier to understand, and it's the best goal for language development. So this idea is not true, right? If you've studied language, you know that there's a lot of variety within languages, many dialects, even many, you know, academic language dialects, right? So there is no one ideal, one standard, and all languages can communicate all dialects of a language can communicate effectively. And they can be understood within a community, right? So, and the idea of this one standard is maybe not always the goal for students. So, and related ideas connected to standard language ideology are these ideas of academic English, right? So as I'm teaching my classes, I'm in universities, and I'm thinking about what do they need to succeed at the university. So, and I hear people talking about how, well, the standard is kind of neutral. It's nobody's first language, right? So we all have to learn it. But it sort of neglects the idea that it's actually much closer to white, middle, and upper class population that use a dialect that's more similar to that. So this idea of its neutrality, when there's a lot of power connected to it, is a myth. And also this idea that it's necessary for students to master English, the academic English that they need. But we know that there's levels of a language that you can understand, that you don't need to understand all and be able to use all the nuances of what a native speaker might be able to use. It's not actually even achievable for a lot of our students who are second language students. So, and it's also maybe not even desired, right? Because it's not necessary to have mastery. So these are some ideas that feed into this, that play into the way we teach grammar or we approach language in our writing classes. Which this leads me to, and yeah, I'm thinking about the grammar in particular. So, but this I think is also, that these are myths, right? That, and so what I'd like to do is give you a minute to read this, this quote. Okay, so this is from Vershan Ashanti Young, And he, in this journal article that he wrote as a response to a New York Times column promoting the idea of one standard English that should be taught by all teachers. And he, in this really, really powerful article, he employs Black English to make his case, right? So it's really powerful, and it reminds us too that it's really not, that this idea that our students can be stigmatized or vulnerable, and that so we really need to be thinking about, like, how are we playing into this attitude? Are we playing into this attitude? It's a question I've been asking myself. So as a writing teacher who employs grammar, does some grammar teaching as part of my teaching, I've been thinking about these conflicting ideas that what I know about language, that all dialects are inherently equal, they're systemic, they negotiate meaning in communities, so they're not any better. But then in the way I teach grammar, that I've almost exclusively focused on one variety of English, what I perceive to be the standardized version that my students will encounter. And I have employed some language when I'm talking about the grammar, such as errors, incorrect, mistakes. And so it kind of, those ideas conflict with each other, right? What I know about language and how I talk about it. So, so the implications, if I'm teaching grammar in this way, if I focus on one variety and I'm talking about variations from a standardized form as errors and mistakes, I can be reinforcing, I am reinforcing standard ideologies, right? The prominence of it. And it also problematizes a written accent, which I know my students are going to have anyway, that they're, so I've been thinking about that. And that is why I'm thinking more. My presentation is about negotiating grammar. Like, what am I going to do how am I going to adjust, rethink how I approach this? And so I'm going to share another idea. This is from Missy Watson. So I'll give you a minute to read this quote. Okay, so I just want to sort of reiterate that, so she's sort of asking some hard questions about, this is a piece that was written in the American Association of University Professors, and sort of pointing out that maybe this is misguided. If we're trying to help them from being stigmatized, it might not really do the trick, right? And she also asked this really hard question, which I want to share with you. It's something I was asking myself, that as with my connection to being English, having a master's in English and being a language teacher and an English expert, are we too steeped in standard language ideology ourselves as authorities on standardized English, who frankly make our living perpetuating standard language ideologies? Are we in too deep to reimagine our professional identities, to redefine the substance of what we do? And why are we so uncomfortable with even pondering these questions? So I think this is a question that was really affected me, that I thought, wow, I really need to think about what I'm doing and how it connects with what I know about language, and worried about the harm that I could be causing to students with by even if it's unintentionally perpetuating some ideas about language. So I came to the conclusion for myself that it's not enough to say that language diversity is important, because I've been doing that, right? I understand, I think varieties of language are important, and different dialects are useful and interesting. but I haven't really been doing very much with them in my class, right? So I was thinking about what are some specific actions I can take to explicitly combat standard language ideologies and their implications in my classroom. So this is my, I've just sort of started down this road. So I haven't figured out all of the answers yet. In fact, I have more questions than I have answers. And I'm hoping that we'll have some time to talk, and you can share some ideas or response to this path and my thinking. But and then this is the central question, is regarding grammar in a multilingual L2 ESOL writing class. How can I address grammar as a part of language development without reinforcing language ideologies that harm students? So, and I haven't seen, as I've been reading a lot about language justice and different ideas related to like ideologies, I haven't seen as much that sort of addresses a population that's more language learner, right? So, I mean, identities and, you know, whether someone's fluent or proficient or are all play a part. But I know as a language teacher that that I have students that they're not making choices, right? Because they don't have something else to choose from. They're still developing. They need syntax, right? They need more syntax. They need more, you know, understanding of the language. It's not the same as it is for example, people who speak a variety of Black English, who are native speakers and they're fluent and they're really, you know, that the idea that you would try to correct it is really problematic in my opinion. But when it comes to language learners, right, it's like, where do you draw the line, right? You know, like, is it just, you know, and as I said, I've sort of I've been thinking about like how I'm talking about like mistakes or errors. Like, is it an error? Do they share a dialect, or is this just the one thing they do and it isn't shared? So anyway, I have a lot of questions about that. But anyway, I'm going to share with you now just my initial foray, my approach into trying to address this question for myself. So my first steps. And this is from my writing class for first-year students, like a basic composition 1 or writing 1. So this is the most important thing that I have done, and I've spent the most effort on, right? So and so last semester I integrated some explorations of standard language ideology and its implications into the writing course. And the reason I did that is for a few reasons, right? I mean, it's a really interesting topic for students, right? Because they're multilingual. They understand language better than monolingual students, right? And so that this topic is interesting for them. But also, if I felt like if I want to be able to do grammar, like, and maybe address some standardized version of English, that I'm obligated to also provide opportunities to learn about these language ideologies and how they impact them. Because I feel like these students are really being impacted by these attitudes, and the more that they know about language and how it works and how they're being, how it works in society, then they'll be empowered to, you know, make informed decisions about how much they want to develop their English and how much they want to conform to a standardized version or how much they want to resist, right? But if you ask students, do they want grammar? They're all going to say yes, right? Because but you have to be, they haven't made an informed decision about that if they don't really understand how languages work and what they've been experiencing. Okay, so I'm going to share. So I did a little class unit on language and power. So the first part, these were like low stakes writing assignments, but could also be turned into like auto ethnographies, right? about their language background and what language and dialects they grew up speaking, and what languages and dialects did they learn at school, and if they've been praised or teased or criticized for how they speak or write. And they have a lot to say about this generally, right? And mostly it's not praise. So this is really highlighted for me that how much this topic is really needed for students to think about and address in their writing classes, and in their definitely I believe in the higher ed world, but also probably in high school and other places, right? So and then same thing, but getting into like a more like telling me one experience, also like an autoethnography where of a positive experience where they receive praise, or some kind of negative experience related to writing in any language. And once again, it makes me sad to just think about some of the stories that I've heard about how students have been treated. And also about what's interesting about these, it also highlights their own internalized ideologies for me, because you can see that it's not just other people judging them, and they understand they are being losing confidence. They're being, like their identities being questioned. They have they're just suffering a lot of what I would call kind of trauma, language trauma, if you read these stories about a lot of multilinguals. And I'm thinking I should be checking the chat if there's anything I should be doing. Sorry, I'm not very good at negotiating this.
No, I'm taking care of the
If there's
chat.
anything important, will you tell me? Okay.
Yes, absolutely, no worries. Oh, actually, Susan is asking you to go back to previous slide.
Oh, okay. This one. And I will make these slides available. I think there's some site where I can put stuff.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I will definitely make this slideshow available to you and its resources. And I will, I have actually other stuff. I thought, I have more than what I'm going to show you, because I've been gathering things that to use for the something I'll talk about in a minute. But anyway, so this one's more just in general, but these are low stakes writing, or they could be made into other things. But then we bring in the content, right? So I had them reading things like world Englishes. I had them reading a little bit of McWhorter, a chapter from this Talking Black. I brought in the film, a section of the film, Sorry to Bother You, which is a locally made film, Oakland, well, with Boots Riley, where there's this a scene where they talk about using your white voice, right? And then this New York Times, like you can take this poll and find out where, it tells you where you probably live. So, and then this wonderful English with an accent, using a chapter out of that to help students learn about ideologies and discrimination. And they find it interesting. They have a lot to say. I know a lot. People have asked me before, like, well, who are your students? Because questioning whether or not students, like there are more international students, so for example, from China, like what do they think of that? But they actually, because these language ideologies are prevalent, they're across all languages, right? So they have a lot to bring to it. They can tell you about how Chinese, the hierarchies in China and ideas, how these ideologies play out in other languages. And so it's been, anyway, it's been useful. So then that's the content where you're reading and you're discussing and you're doing writing. And then like this kind of argument on writing, where they can write a position paper that the audience is their college instructors, and discuss whether or not non-standard forms of English should be acceptable, not penalized in student writing and presentations. So this assignment, it allows them to sort of integrate some of the ideas and they're thinking about it, but also it gives them practice and sort of thinking, talking about this for themselves, to be able to advocate for themselves or to be able to resist if they wanted to. So anyway, and this is from a TESOL workshop that I mean, I got it in the in my works cited list, but you can see that Slinkard and Jeevers, they had some really great ideas for assignments, and I started drawing on that. And then, okay, so that's that's actually the biggest step I've taken. So I'm going to talk to you about these other little kind of maybe just a little bit of reframing or for these other ones, which was I've revised my priorities for grammar feedback and instruction. It's not a big shift, but before I always, so I always focused on clarity, right? You can't address everything, but always trying to focus on the things that are going to impact whether or not someone can comprehend it. And so verbs and sentence structure, right? What we sometimes think of as global errors or global issues, right? Are more likely to affect clarity. So if I'm going to run a grammar activity, I'm probably going to focus on one of those areas. Or before, I might have also staked out a room for high frequency errors that don't affect meaning, but lead to stigmatization. And so that was the idea. Oh, it's stigmatizing. So you should work on those too, and they're frequent, so it can really help them. But I've kind of let go of that a little bit. I'm thinking about students, not that they can't work on it, but it's not where I'm going to put my focus, right? And so my final step, which is also kind of a small step, which is trying to be a little bit more linguistically and use more linguistically informed language for describing and giving feedback on students' grammar. So I have had error correction logs, right, where I describe errors and error correction sheets and mistakes. And I'm trying to sort of rethink that a little bit. And more like, how am I talking about these things? And so I'm trying to remove these judgments of correctness and mistakes or things that are bad, and then just sort of discuss patterns of usage or varieties of usage, and be more descriptive. So, and focusing once again still on the kind of things that are more like looking at the writing and saying, oh, this, I don't understand what you're saying here, and then trying to get at if there is a grammatical reason for that, right? So future directions. So I have a lot of ideas for future directions. I'd like to hear what you're doing, and oh good, we have plenty of time. What you've been doing, but I'm just going to start it off with, I'm going to take this Language Empower unit and turn it into a whole course where the whole course is focused on different ideas related to language and equity. And so that's been kind of exciting, and I'm building that up for the fall. I'm also, as part of that, a more variety of English in the course. So I'm not just giving them standard varieties of like essays or analyses of language. I'm going to actually try to employ them. And I think I'm going to use the Bershan Ashanti Young piece because I think it really is beautifully written, and it sort of demonstrates the power of different dialects. Do more linguistic analysis activities and assignments. So having them explore it, language as sort of like a linguist would, right? So we're describing what's happening and thinking about maybe looking at language in different, like in media or in particular in genres or areas. So I think that's a really exciting place because writing class is a language class, and these are language activities, right? So I don't see it as displacing anything. I see it as enhancing. And providing more opportunities for students to use all their linguistic resources. So haven't done it yet, but thinking about how to, like, allowing them to be able to code mesh or trans languages, because I know these are actually natural parts of language that multilinguals will do. And so how can I bring that into my first year writing course? Oops, so good, I put it in there twice. So leading to the linguistic analysis activities and assignments, critical language and awareness approach. To me, I hadn't heard this term before until maybe a month ago, but maybe some of you are more familiar with it. But I have been to a couple of sessions now with Shauna Shapiro. I went to her session at the 4Cs conference, online conference, and also a recent one, workshop she did. And she has this new book out. It's called Cultivating Critical Language Awareness. And critical language awareness is kind of like, it actually describes what I have been kind of trying to head towards. And I thought, oh, here's the framework I can use. Because it's research-based, but it considers language, but also ideas of privilege and power, relationships, and it's a lot about describing grammar. So, and this book, I have ordered it, but I have not received it, but there's this really useful companion website that has tons of information. So this might be the best thing I'm sharing with you today, is that go check this out and join the critical language awareness group that she started on a website, because people are sharing materials about how to integrate it. And she's also the person I've seen that sort of spent the most time describing how it might connect to language learners, people we might identify more as needing language development. All right, so let's hear from you. I mean, I'm thinking, how many people do we have? We
have 14 people in the room, including you.
Okay.
And so since this is a very small group, you can unmute yourself to ask questions, or you can use the chat box if you don't want to unmute yourself, or you can use our Padlet board that I shared with you, and I'm going to put it in the chat box again.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just open it up. Is there anyone who wants to share ideas about how they bring in grammar without trying to perpetuate these ideas of the language ideologies, standard language? Or questions you have about my thinking is also possible. Go ahead.
Well, I'm John Tashima, working at Santa Ana School of Continuing Education. So, many of my students are immigrants, and so of course they're second language learners, and I find myself trying to balance. I find this idea. I mean, I do see it as a real core equity issue. But at the same time, it's also like I want to balance their expectations and also the expectations of colleagues that would be taking classes after my composition or ESL or writing class, where some others may view they'll view language in a traditional manner, and I'm wondering in what ways you might, if you have any ways that you prepare them for that.
Well. And other people are welcome to jump in too, but I mean, I would say that, I mean, I know that argument, right? I mean, I've used it myself, right? And I wonder about like is it really, how can we do it without sort of perpetuating? And I think part of it is you've got to include some of these ideas so that the students have some understanding of what's happening. But can you teach the grammar? Can you just focus on certain things and be careful about how you talk about it with them, so that that it doesn't actually feed into these ideologies? I mean, like, what are you talking about? Students that are at in a higher ed context, or more?
This would be usually secondary level or below.
Okay.
But I've also worked with students at post-secondary. But and that is something I try to do, of course, is to acknowledge. You don't really just jump on them for that kind of the little errors. And of course, students really do want to. Very often they focus on that, of course, because they want to be correct. They've probably had the experience where they've been corrected, perhaps rather rudely before, and there's a real motivation. I wonder, just tying into the sort of keynote that we had earlier with metacognition, I wonder if that is helpful in terms of helping them see sort of see this social nature of the language. In other words, to sort of acknowledge what they have and to also, say, well, this is also sort of an expectation that you're going to have to run into as well.
Right. And I mean, I think that that those conversations about like the ideologies are really, really helpful. And because I think, we can set them up also for failure, right? If they're expecting to totally master something that, they're always, I mean, it depends on, like when they started learning English, maybe secondary school is a little different. That these ideas in some ways might be even more important than the grammar, right? As they sort of count, and it doesn't mean you can't teach the grammar. That's the part where I'm sort of like, because I feel like I know that the grammar can be helpful, right? So, yes. But and so because they don't, like, I've had people say, well, they can choose rhetorically between this and that, and I'm like, my students can't choose, right? Some of them don't have choices. They don't know how to say, like do a particular move one way. So I know that there is some of it's lexicogrammatical, like vocabulary, like maybe sentence frames, or and some of it is just like maybe sentence combining things like with subordinators and coordinators, and then logic in the, so being able to make a variety of sentence types is really important. So I don't know. I think I understand the practicality issue, right? Like you want to be practical, but does it really, I mean, they're still going to face that prejudice, right? And so maybe they'd be better armed, and you can also help them also make their own choices. Like I haven't talked too much about that, but I'm thinking about like the agency. Like we don't want to be telling students, well, you can't learn that because it's not important. I'm not going to teach it to you, right? Because it's really unjust. So I'm not even going to cover it. But if the more they understand about it, then they can make informed choices about what they want to learn, where they want, and they can at times, if they want to, resist, but they can still learn it, but they need to understand what it is. So I think that's like my big actually where the school I am working, California College of the Arts, I've been working with the director, and we, she's actually designing the curriculum to add a language justice related outcome. Realizing that it's so important, not even just for the multilingual students, but for even monolingual students, right? So they have a sense of their own privilege and power, and but you can still teach the grammar, but it's complicated. I don't have all the answers.
No, that's okay. Neither do I.
I wish we had all the answers, right?
Right.
Yeah, I wish I could have all the answers, but I'm hoping to explore this a little bit more, and like what is the most essential thing, and how connecting actually the language, maybe particular. I was thinking a little bit about rhetorical grammar, which usually relies more on like a sort of proficiency in native speaker, like making decisions.
Right.
But what is it that we might learn from that area that we could bring to the non-native speaker, or the ESOL students?
And we have two more questions. One is in
okay.
chat, and one, Kim, I know you've been waiting. So do you want to go ahead, Kim?
Hi, sure. Yeah, I don't necessarily have to go first. I was just going to speak to John's point because I find the same issue when I teach, first year comp at a community college. And I have found over the years that I think contextualizing sort of the systemic prejudice, right, and linguistic justice for students and telling them, like, we can't change the system overnight. You need to have some of these things when you go to apply for a job, when you're writing an email to your employer, future boss, whatever it might be. Grammar can be a powerful tool, and it's unfortunate that it's also an oppressive tool. So I kind of give them that context that of choice, just like everyone is talking about in the chat, and Shalle, what you're talking about as well, and just letting them know that however they speak is valuable, and sort of empowering them to code switch when needed, and that they do have that choice and they do have that ability to navigate the system, and a system that is sort of aligned against them, right? But knowing that, I will give them the tools that they need. I don't spend a lot of time on grammar. I kind of get feedback from them, what's the most helpful, and maybe writing emails and showing them where comma placements and things like that, like rather than using it punitively, obviously in grading and things like that. So it's tough, and I'm still kind of working out the best ways, but I really appreciate this workshop. I think it's wonderful, and I love to see all the comments as well.
It's helpful. I just wanted to make one comment about the idea of this grammar or a language is a powerful tool, or a dialect is a tool. And for me, I just feel like the language is so, especially for certain communities, like, maybe that are more bilingual, or like in high school or multilingual, that it sort of makes it sound like it's something you could go, like a cell phone or something you could go pick up at the store, but it's so intertwined with their identity. And so and I've seen this from just reading student papers, and we're doing I'm doing a research project with in the department related to this idea that students, there's so much, like, if we tell them they have to, or they need, you can help them but they can't make a decision about what they want to do if they don't understand how it's working. And I don't know, I don't know, I wouldn't say they need to have it. I might say that here's how it works. And it's, I would, explain what it is, but there's also a lot of mythology around standard language, and, but it is prevalent. But if they understand that, then I think that's really valuable too.
Thank you, Shelly. Last question. Marcel, do you want to unmute yourself, or do you want me to read? Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Sorry, I won't go on camera. I had a booster shot and I do not feel very well, but I didn't want to miss Shelly's talk. I just am wondering about whether understanding what makes a dialect and a language actually is a source of empowerment. I've seen, unfortunate, even discrimination among people who speak Spanish in the classroom towards mom, and kind of a defenselessness sometimes. They don't have the language to explain like what mom is. And part of it is, they may not have had schooling, or they don't have the metacognitive, metalinguistic tools to be able to explain like what you do in mom versus compared to Spanish. So I'm just wondering, like, have you seen that come up, kind of the education around what even makes a language, and introduces some of these discussions about even dialects and shift in language is a legitimate act of change.
Yeah, that's actually other, like, other ways of thinking about, like, the ideologies, like the ideas that languages are this another language ideology, that languages are static and they're siloed and they're, they aren't fluid, that people have this idea of purity and keeping them separate. And I think the idea of the language and the dialect distinction is interesting, because I've been thinking a lot about that myself. Like, if, say, for example, my mainland Chinese students speaking to each other, is that a dialect? Is it shared? Or do they each have their own issues? I don't know. But there are certain things that we know, right, about Chinese people who come from Chinese language background into English, and certain things that, you know, like contrastive, like not contrastive analysis, I can't think of the word for it right now, but where you look at like the typical errors, right? Of like they have trouble with tense, right? Because they don't have tense. And so it's interesting to think about how you frame it. Are they learners? Is it a learner language? Is it a dialect? But I think it actually, that some of those distinctions might be really interesting.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think there's some real power in talking to college students who come out on the other end, like feeling more empowered, and then them being the ones who are tutoring our students. I've seen some kind of peer-to-peer empowerment, because I'm not a mom speaker, so I can't even be the one to boost the agency in a way that a peer can. But thank you so much, Shelly.
Thank you for commenting and coming.
And
so are we out of time?
Yes, thank you everyone for joining. And Shelly, thank you so much for sharing all these great, inspiring ideas, questions, and making the session so engaging for everyone. I think the ideas, the points you touched on, they were really, really important, as most of us here are language teachers. So thank you so much, Shelly, for sharing again. So our next session will start at 12. So you can take a maybe 10-minute break. We have 3 different Zoom rooms. You can look at the schedule to choose the one you would like to attend. But thank you so much again for all great questions, comments in the chat box and in Padlet. So see you in the next session. Bye-bye.